Many modern-day historians tell us that our nation's founding fathers were a diverse group of atheists, deists, and political revolutionaries. So where did they find the common ground and the inspiration for the ideas that birthed the most successful nation in history? Did their faith play a role in our nation's founding ideas? Do we have, as many historians claim, a godless constitution? Discover the forgotten and astonishing story of our nation's foundation in the American Heritage series. For centuries, Americans were taught a truthful view of history that recognized the godly heroes and moral foundation our nation was founded upon. But in recent years, a new version of history has assaulted the moral and spiritual fiber of our nation, leaving the truth of our past eliminated and forgotten until today. Join historian David Barton and experience the untold story of our nation's history in the American Heritage series. In the classroom of our nation's history, Americans are increasingly taught opposing views of founding presidents, such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Were our nation's founders truly men of moral and religious character? And what role, if any, did their religious faith play in the founding of the American government? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
We have over 200 individuals that we call founding fathers. Overwhelmingly, they were Christian. Probably 95% of that group were Christians. The signers of the Declaration, signers of the Constitution, etc. Today we hear about those who weren't Christian and think that's who they all were. But those that were Christians, and that's again overwhelmingly 95% of them, they were not only active in their own faith, they were active in helping spread that faith to others. They saw the Bible as the basis of so many of their ideas. So many of those ideas were incorporated into their documents. That's clear in their writings, it's clear in the books they used. But they also wanted others to know those same biblical ideas. God was so important to the founding fathers that when they met in Congress for the first time in September of 1774, they opened with prayer. But apparently it was not a routine, genteel little prayer like we might pray at a public meeting today. No, according to the writings of those who were there, that time of prayer in Congress was momentous as well as extended. In fact, according to John Adams, Congress not only prayed, but the delegates also studied 4 chapters of the Bible in Congress. That Bible study was so timely and had such a profound effect upon the delegates that John Adams wrote a letter to his wife Abigail telling her,
"I never saw a greater effect upon an audience. It seemed as if heaven had ordained that psalm to be read on the morning. I must beg you to read that psalm. Read this letter and the 35th psalm to your friends. Read it to your father."
By the way, her father was the Reverend William Smith, the pastor of their local church. Silas Deane said this time of prayer and scripture reading in Congress was so powerful that, quote, even the Quakers shed tears. There's no doubt that America has been a successful nation with a stable, successful government because of the foundation on which it was built, a foundation unlike any other nation in the world. In fact, George Washington, in his famous farewell address of 1796, reminded us why our government and its policies were so successful. He declared,
"Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports."
So what you find really intriguing is that when you look, for example, at the first National Bible Society formed in America, the American Bible Society, this little jewel right there, that's their first constitution. You see who the officers are that formed the first Bible Society in America. They're all founding fathers. And as you go down the list, and you look at the Elias Boudinot's, and you look at the John Jays, and you look at signers of the Constitution like John Langdon and Charles Crutchworth Pinckney and Caleb Strong, who helped frame the Constitution, all these guys, what's striking is on all the officers of the American Bible Society, there's not a preacher among them. Wow. Every one of these guys. There were Supreme Court justices, there were military leaders, signers of the Constitution, governors. I mean, it was all these other, now we would expect today a Bible Society to be started by a bunch of preachers. Not back then. It was started by all these civil leaders. This signer of the Constitution is Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, and this one is John Langdon. Interestingly, there's a strong connection between these two signers and the landmark Promise Keepers rally which took place here on the National Mall outside the Capitol. The Promise Keepers rally, a gathering of between 1 and 2 million men dedicated to being godly influences in their family and their world, has been described by official observers as the largest gathering ever to occur in Washington, D.C. The American Bible Society prepared 1 million copies of this special commemorative edition of the Bible for that rally, and those million Bibles went quickly. Of course, it's nothing for the American Bible Society to distribute 1 million Bibles in one day, for they distribute upwards of 200 million Bibles in a single year. However, what many may not recognize is that the American Bible Society was the same American Bible Society founded 2 centuries ago with the help of Charles Cotesworth Pinckney and John Langdon. Here is the original constitution of the American Bible Society, and the list of its founders is quite impressive. Its first president was the Honorable Elias Boudinot. Elias Boudinot had served as the president of the Continental Congress, had signed the final peace treaty with Great Britain to end the Revolution, and had helped frame the Bill of Rights. Incidentally, Elias Boudinot also authored this book. It's called The Age of Revelation. It's a complete biblical refutation of Thomas Paine's anti-religious work, The Age of Reason. The vice presidents of the American Bible Society, in addition to John Langdon and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, the signers of the Constitution already mentioned, also included several Supreme Court justices. Justice John Jay, the original Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and one of the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers, Justice Bushrod Washington, and Justice Smith Thompson, also a Secretary of the Navy, and Justice John Marshall, an officer on George Washington's staff during the Revolution, a Secretary of State under President John Adams, and the 4th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, also became a later Vice President of the American Bible Society. Other founding Vice Presidents of the American Bible Society included numerous governors and state leaders, such as Caleb Strong, Governor of Massachusetts and a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, William Gray, Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, John Cotton Smith, Governor of Connecticut, Jonas Galusha, Governor of Vermont, William Jones, Governor of Rhode Island, Isaac Shelby, Governor of Kentucky, George Madison, a later elected Governor of Kentucky, Thomas Worthington, Governor of Ohio, Thomas Posey, Governor of Indiana, James Brown, U.S. Senator from Louisiana, William Tillman, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, William Gaston, Justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and Richard Varick, the Attorney General and the Speaker of the House of New York, became the original treasurer of the American Bible Society. Also included as original founders of the American Bible Society were Felix Grundy, who served as a U.S. Attorney General under President Martin Van Buren, William Wirt, who served as the U.S. Attorney General under Presidents James Monroe and John Quincy Adams, Matthew Clarkson, a Major General during the American Revolution, and you can go right on through the list. The original founders of the American Bible Society were a veritable who's who of American political founders.
In the classroom of our nation's history, Americans are increasingly taught opposing views of founding presidents, such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Were our nation's founders truly men of moral and religious character? And what role, if any, did their religious faith play in the founding of the American government? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
The first Bible Society started in America was also started by founding fathers. It was the Philadelphia Bible Society. Now, that particular Bible Society was started by signer of the Declaration, Benjamin Rush. Now, that's 1809. So he starts this Bible Society. They get it off the ground. They get Bibles distributed and printed. Every American, they want to have a Bible, founding father. And other guys say, you know, that's really a pretty good idea, have a Bible Society. So the other framers started jumping on that bandwagon of starting Bible societies. Between 1809, when the Philadelphia Bible Society was formed, and 1816, when the American Bible Society was formed, there were 121 different Bible societies formed in America. So here's the New Jersey Bible Society. Signers, founding fathers did that. Here's the Massachusetts Bible Society. Our founding fathers did that one. Here's the New York Bible Society. And you go through state after state after state. Matter of fact, You get back here and you find the Virginia Bible Society. Now, what makes that one particularly interesting is Thomas Jefferson was one of the founders of the Virginia Bible Society. Oh no, not Jefferson, he's secular.
One of
He
their
wanted
favorites.
Yeah, exactly. See, Jefferson founded the Bible Society. He gave large contributions to help get the Bible out to every American.
So when you go back to the original documents, when you go back to the original writings of the founding fathers, the roughly 250, founding fathers, they do things like form Bible societies.
That's right. And again, these aren't preachers we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, these are political leaders forming Bible societies. And I have to stop on Jefferson for just a minute, because when you say Jefferson Bible, people say, I've heard of the Jefferson Bible. Oh yeah, that's where he cut out everything he disagreed with. He was so anti-Christian, so anti-Bible, he cut it all out. Well, temporary timeout. If he's so opposed to the Bible, why is he one of the founders of a society that promotes the entire Bible? I mean, if the Jefferson Bible charge is right, that Jefferson cut out parts of the Bible with which he disagreed, then why would he fund and contribute to and help run a society that gives out all the scriptures unedited? That's inconsistent. What happens is, this little document here is what's called the Jefferson Bible. We call this the Jefferson Bible, and in the last 30 years, people have consistently said this is the scriptures, but Jefferson cut out everything with which he disagreed. Well, if you go to the front of this work, it doesn't have the title Jefferson Bible. And if you use that title to him, he'd probably have punched you out for saying it. The title he gave it is The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh my God.
What he did was he went through and cut out all the red letters of Jesus, pasted them end to end so he could read the red letters of Jesus without stopping. It's not what he cut out, it's what he put in. But why did he do that? He tells us, and he did this twice. He did it in 1804, he did it again in 1819. He said that he did this to be a missionary tool to help evangelize the Indians. He said, because if we can get them to read the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, it'll change their life. So this was not a work that he turned and cut out everything he disagreed with. It's a work where he took all the words of Jesus and put them there so you could read the words of Jesus nonstop. And he did that as a missionary tool for the Indians. These four paintings move us forward some 150 years in America's history, close to the time when Washington, D.C. was planned and the Capitol was constructed. Interestingly, these four paintings were painted by one of our founding fathers. They're the work of John Trumbull, called the Painter of the Revolution. John Trumbull served as an officer during the American Revolution, and what makes Trumbull's paintings so meaningful is that he personally witnessed much of what he painted, and he personally knew many of those that he painted in these pictures. Because of John Trumbull's commitment to artistic accuracy, the faces in these paintings are probably about as close as we'll ever get to having photographs of our founding fathers. John Trumbull came from a family of outspoken Christians, and the other members of his family are honored here at the Capitol, as we will soon see. In fact, as an indication of the strong faith of this family, I hold here one of several proclamations issued by his brother, Jonathan. Jonathan also served as an officer. He was an officer on George Washington's staff during the Revolution. Here's Colonel Trumbull himself, seated with the officers at the surrender of Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. After the Revolution, Jonathan became governor of Connecticut, and this proclamation, issued while he was governor, calls the entire state to a day of prayer and thanksgiving. As you can see, the language is strongly evangelical. Trumbull issued several such proclamations, but this is no surprise, for these proclamations reflect the very nature of Jonathan Trumbull. In fact, Jonathan Trumbull was only one of an overwhelming majority of our founding fathers and early leaders who were strongly and openly religious. In this, the house connecting corridor, just outside National Statuary Hall, you'll find additional statues, including this one of Jonathan Trumbull, the only governor of the 13 states to serve in that capacity throughout the entire Revolution. He probably did more than any single individual to supply men, munitions, and materials to General George Washington. In fact, he became one of Washington's closest friends and confidants, and Washington called him Brother Jonathan. In his hand, you see him holding the letter of resignation which he sent to the state legislature in October 1783. In that letter, he explains that after 14 years of leading the state, including through 8 years of war, the state is now safe, and he's therefore ready to retire. At age 73, he wanted to return to his ministerial studies.
On my advanced stage of life, a life worn out almost in the constant cares of office, I think it is my duty to retire from the busy concern of public affairs, that at the evening of my days, I may sweeten their decline by devoting myself with less avocation and more attention to the duties of religion, the service of my God, and preparation for a future and happier state of experience, in which pleasing employment I shall not cease to remember my country, and to make it my ardent prayer that heaven will not fail to bless her with its choicest favors.
Jonathan Trumbull is another one of our many American patriots and heroes who is honored with a statue here at the Capitol and who is also a minister of the gospel.
It's almost safe to say that everything that I would have learned in school in American history has been filtered before it got to me. And when did that start happening?
American history has been filtered to remove religious and moral history, traditional values, patriotism. A lot of that is gone. We've turned American history into a victim history. We start finding people that are victims that were mistreated, and that did happen. But that, again, was the exception rather than the rule. Right. Even though it happened to people groups, it still was not what dominated the entire span of 4 centuries of American history. What ended those atrocities were religious folks getting involved, were preachers getting involved, were churches getting involved. We don't talk about that. I guarantee you in our American history textbooks, we will all learn about the Salem witch trials where 21 were put to death by those religious Puritans in Massachusetts. What we will not learn about is the abolition movement that was started by ministers. We won't learn about the first, second, third Great Awakenings. We'll learn about none of the 6 religious revivals. We will also not learn about the fact that even when 21 were put to death in New England for the witch trials, in Europe, in that time, in the witch trials in Europe, over 500,000 were put to death in Europe. We will also not study the fact that the witch trials in America were brought to an end when 2 preachers of the gospel went to the civil leaders and said, this is wrong. What you're doing is wrong and needs to stop. Wow. So it's preachers that brought the witch trial to an end in America. On top of that, the judge who was in charge of the witch trials went into church and repented openly and renounced what he had done and said, I was misled, I misunderstood, this is not what God wanted. See, what we do in American history is we show the bad side, but we don't show the other side that's there. Right. And so what we've learned in American history is really a rewritten history. It's not reflective of what actually happened. Well, it is reflective of incidents that happened, but it's not reflective of the tone that happened, particularly when it comes to traditional religious and moral values, when it comes to elements of patriotism, when it comes to elements of inclusion, when it comes to black history.
In the classroom of our nation's history, Americans are increasingly taught opposing views of founding presidents, such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Were our nation's founders truly men of moral and religious character? And what role, if any, did their religious faith play in the founding of the American government? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
In our current textbooks, we think black history started with Martin Luther King Jr., and that's a great place to cover. Right. But you have to go all the way back 300 years earlier to start black history, because there are a number of black patriots in America that are really cool guys. Yes. The Reverend John Morant, most people have never heard of him. Harry Hoosier, who's heard of Harry Hoosier? Well, they've heard of the Hoosiers of Indiana, but somebody forgot to tell them that Harry Hoosier was a black preacher in the First Great Awakening that drew larger crowds than any other ministers in the Great Awakening. See, there is so much we don't hear in all aspects of our, and we leave out folks that have religious faith. We leave out folks that have traditional moral values, and we get into a real secular economic view of history, and we miss so much of what happens.
It's almost 180 degrees wrong.
Well, it is, and it particularly is with founding fathers, because founding fathers are so important to current policy.
Right.
Every time we go into a courtroom, we're arguing about what the founding fathers wanted. Well, if current history can show that they're all atheists and agnostics and deists, then it's real easy for that judge to say, you know, these guys would not have wanted religious expressions going on. Right. But that's bad history. And see, that's what these Bible societies show. Our founding fathers who signed the documents were the guys who were promoting the Bible. Matter of fact, this little book right here would be a fun read for anyone today. It's written by a President of the United States who was a founding father, John Quincy Adams. Now, here's a little piece of trivia on John Quincy Adams. His father, signer of the Declaration, John Quincy, grew up in the American Revolution. When he was 8 years old, he had his musket out with the Massachusetts Minutemen at the age of 8.
Wow.
He's already in favor of supporting his country. He goes on to become a diplomat under George Washington. George Washington called the young John Quincy Adams the most effective American diplomat we had. John Quincy Adams got appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. He was confirmed by the Senate. He was not even the nation when it happened. He was an ambassador overseas, and he turned down the appointment. He'd already been confirmed to the Supreme Court. So he's a huge Supreme Court figure. He's a great legal figure. But this is a book that he did for 10-year-old young people, showing them how to read through the Bible from cover to cover once every year.
My goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Now, what happens today if a president does a book for 10-year-olds showing them how to read the Bible cover to cover?
Could you imagine?
No, you can't. That's unconstitutional. Wait a minute. This is one of the guys who fought for the nation, who helped birth the nation, who was there from the very beginning, doing this for 10-year-olds. See, they understood the Bible was the source of our ideas.
Right.
And if we lost those biblical concepts, we lose inalienable rights. We lose separation of powers out of Jeremiah 17:9. We lose checks and balances. We lose the consent of the governed. We lose all these things that they took out of the Bible, teachings of the Bible, and placed into our documents. They wanted the Bible taught. The other thing I find really interesting with these guys, living in our modern society, we all write wills. We're taught to write wills so that we leave things to our children, and so that the state doesn't get all of our possessions when we die. Everyone's supposed to have a will. They're called last wills and testaments. We don't do that. Founding Fathers did. It was last will and testament. In those documents, they proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. These documents are read to the entire family. And for example, Patrick Henry, in his will, he goes through, he gives away everything to his children. At the end of his will, he says, "This is all I can leave my children, but the inheritance of Jesus Christ is what will make them rich." And he goes into this thing about how what they need more than anything he gave them is what Jesus can give them. You also have Richard Stockton, who was a signer of the Declaration, who was in prison, made a prisoner of war. He died as a result of the way the British treated him. And he knew his young kids would never grow up to know their father. So in his last will and testament, he goes through the entire plan of salvation, every major Christian doctrine, because he says, I know that you're going to be reading this, and you need to know what your father believes. And he went through and laid out the whole gospel. This is a signer of the Declaration. If you look at their wills, their last will and testament, they get up on their soapboxes and they preach. They preach to their family. They preach to anybody who's going to read that will. And that will then goes into the courthouse where it's a legal document that will be examined for generations afterwards, and it has the testimony of Jesus Christ throughout. Here is Ethan Allen. Allen was an officer in the American Revolution and became famous for the capture of the British stronghold of Ticonderoga in 1775. Even though the Declaration of Independence was not signed until 1776, the next year, Great Britain had already been warring against her American colonies. In 1774, she had laid siege to Boston and erected a naval blockade. The battles of Charleston, Breed's or Bunker Hill, and Lexington and Concord followed soon thereafter, all long before the Declaration of Independence was signed. As the conflict spread from Massachusetts onto Virginia and other areas, Connecticut began to fear for her own safety. Connecticut therefore secretly contacted Ethan Allen and requested that he capture Fort Ticonderoga. Even though Ticonderoga was still far away from the scene of any military activity at that time, it was hoped that by this action, the British would be forced to pull troops away from their offensive actions against the Americans in order to defend their own forts. Ethan Allen gathered his Vermont Green Mountain Boys. They surrounded the unsuspecting British and captured the guards. Having secured the perimeter of the fort, Ethan Allen, in his own words, in his own autobiography, told what happened next.
One of the sentries made a pass at one of my officers with a charged bayonet. My first thought was to kill him with my sword, but in an instant, I altered the design and fury of the blow to a cut onto the head, upon which he dropped his gun and asked quarter, which I readily granted him, and demanded of him the place where the commanding officer kept. He showed me a pair of stairs in front of a barrack on the west part of the garrison, which led up to a second story in said barrack, to which I immediately repaired, and ordered the commander, Captain de la Place, to come forth instantly.
Captain! Captain! Come forth now, or sacrifice the garrison.
at which the captain came immediately to the door.
What in the devil is this?
Deliver your fort at once, sir, or risk your garrison.
By what authority do you make this command?
In the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress.
And with my drawn sword, again demanded an immediate surrender of the garrison, with which he then complied.
In the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. It was this phrase and the capture of Fort Ticonderoga which earned Ethan Allen this place in Statuary Hall.
You're going back to the original text. You're going back to original documents. This is irrefutable.
Yeah.
Well, it's irrefutable, kind of. It's irrefutable as long as you're willing to look at the truth.
Right.
There was a Supreme Court case in which we were involved, and we get involved in Supreme Court cases with historical documents, because as the issues are argued in front of the court, you have historical issues. You say, here's the original documents of the guy who wrote that clause of the Constitution. Here's what he said. Or here's the original documents of the first law passed on that clause. So you can show originals. We did that in one of the cases where that in the briefs that you have to present to the court, you show the documents, you go through the argumentation. One of the Supreme Court justices dealt with our arguments that we had given, historical arguments. And the issue was whether you could have a prayer at a graduation. Now you have to understand that's not a new thing for the Founding Fathers. The first public school law passed in America was 1647. So public schools are 120 years old at the time of the Founding Fathers. So now we have an issue before the court that can you have a prayer at a graduation? Well, we can go back and show signers of the U.S. Constitution that gave prayers at graduations at public schools in their day. And so we go through that, and we go through all the historical document. And so this justice noted, he said, well, that kind of proves the Founding Fathers were not opposed to school prayer. They condoned it. They even advocated it. But he said that proves one of two things about the Founding Fathers. He said it proves either that, first of all, they were hypocrites because they knew it was wrong to pray in public and they went ahead and did it anyway. He said, or it just proves they didn't understand the Constitution. You're going, really? The guys who wrote it. So what you get is you get a worldview conflict at times where people don't want truth, they don't want to know truth, but most people, 90%, want to know the truth. It does affect the way they behave. They want to do the right thing. They've just been taught wrong information.
For more information on the American Heritage Series, or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.